Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Hi
Hey,
everyone.
hey, Autumn. Hello, Narsima.
Hi.
Why are you wearing a sweater when it's so nice out?
Cold out. Cold out. Beaches can be cold, Windy. My pina colada is really cold.
So I'm making I set it up to automatically record so I won't forget anymore.
Hello everyone.
Hello. Well, so far I'm 0 for 2. My goal has been to be down on campus at 9 so that I can just be there and have my class all ready, and both weeks I am still preparing my class and still at home, and I could have to run there after our meeting. You look like you just came in from the cold, Ryan.
Yeah, running late, but I'm here.
Video's not on.
Hey, Ellison.
Hi.
Oh, I'm gonna have to let you share. So, Ellison, this is your meeting. I'll let you start when you're ready.
Is everyone here? That's good.
Think I don't remember who was gonna be out. Stacy's not here. And
Karthik.
Kartik's not here, yeah.
Okay.
But you can be in charge.
All right, then I'll go ahead and just get started. So I had, I think, asked to be on the schedule about a month after the last time we talked about this review of representations of well-being in home-based field studies. And Zara and I have continued working along with Tammy on assembling journal articles in a review style like database that meet criteria around representations of well-being in home-based field studies. There's an emphasis on field studies because the two goals that I haven't changed the language on since last time, but I thought I would bring up as a reminder, were to compile measures and representations of well-being when they've been included in field-based studies that are situated in the home environment. And then from that data set, understand how these representations are over or underrepresent, or maybe buoyant. I don't know what the buoyancy point would be, but with respect to frameworks of well-being that put measures in different categories like psychological well-being, physical well-being. We wanted to filter the results of our literature review through some of those frameworks and see what's getting represented, maybe what's getting represented well, what's not represented, and maybe learn why, with the intent to provide guidance for future research for this kind of work where people are, or researchers or practitioners are wanting to gather information from people living in their homes about their well-being as it relates to their home. And our search includes terms like these. These are the same terms I showed last time, and both Zara and I have done some iterations on this that are documented in our review or in our database. And so what I wanted to give as an update at this point is we're in that green box. So if this is from blue to green to yellow is one way to represent flow in a literature review process. I think we're solidly in the green zone here, searching the literature, screening for inclusion, which involves reviewing abstracts and titles and maybe like highlight sections or practical implication sections, and started doing some review of full text and even some extraction of data. I haven't really done much analysis, but I did want to show the kinds of studies and data that we're looking at so far. I think we still have, it feels like a ways to go, but at least we're getting into extracting specific information from studies and learning from that process. See, there's a chat. Is there a question? It's like, mention comfort.
Sorry, Ellison, I just was
Oh.
mentioning that word comfort. but I
Yes,
just-
yes. And actually comfort is in part of the like cert. It's not on that list because I didn't update that slide, but comfort is coming up. But thanks for that, Narasimha. Last time I spent a little bit of time focusing on, I don't know, it's not here, like what field-based means to me and the kind of audience that I think this would be geared towards. And rightfully so, if you came away with the impression that the review would be of papers that would, or gathering primary data in the field, that is what I have in mind. That's not like when people say the field, that can mean still quite a range of things. And the collection of papers, which is now over 100 and closer to like 130, it has an emphasis on studies that have been done, with people gathering data directly from them. But there are some studies that include surveys that would have been deployed by like, online platforms or in a way that doesn't involve any direct contact with the survey respondents. And then the other thing I'll say, which is where I'm going to actually spend a chunk of this time, is that both Zara and I have found some studies that are review type papers themselves, or papers that are trying to talk about the how well-being is represented with respect to housing and well-being, housing and energy. And those are still in our data set to inform the ways people are thinking about well-being, not necessarily to be sources of data to extract. Because an example paper isn't necessarily gathering new data or making decisions about how to measure well-being. But I think it still informs this review. So I haven't yet figured out how we'll draw the flow diagram for inclusion and exclusion for data analysis, but I don't think I'm not really worried about it. And I probably benefited from a few conversations with you, Tammy, that I'm not too concerned if I have to explain the discrimination process sort of post hoc.
And just to be clear, Ellison, I assume that you're not finding reviews that are doing the same thing that you are. Right.
That's an interesting question. There's things that have titles that sound a lot like it. I mean, I think this is actually where it feels like in the end, the contribution will be based on, what will it be based on? It's more than just subjective like opinion, but yes, there are papers that have written things like, can homes affect well-being? A scoping review among housing conditions, indoor environmental quality, and mental health outcomes. I mean, that is like 99% of what I feel like I'm proposing we could do. It's slightly different because they're asking the question, can they affect well-being? And we're asking the question, if assuming they do, how would you measure it? So it is different. But like this one, the relationship between buildings and health, systematic review. Understanding the impact. I feel like there's a lot of work out there that's like trying to get at the same thing, maybe because it's a thing people want to understand, and it's not easy to write about. So somebody reads what somebody else wrote about it and sees a way that they can write about it differently. I probably fall into that camp, like reading what other people have written and think, well, that's one way to structure the questions and argument, and it doesn't feel satisfying. So what about it isn't satisfying? And what could we do that was different? I don't feel like I've come across anything that's like, well, this is what I wanted to see out there is done, and so now we don't need to do this. I don't feel that way, but if people, you know, listening or participating today, like, I feel like that's a decent question. I don't feel that it's a loss to say that what we're trying to do maybe looks like it's already been done. Does that
Well, I
answer the
guess,
question? Or maybe, I don't know.
yeah, I guess I think if somebody had done exactly what you wanted to do, that you would just not feel like doing it anymore. That'd be my guess. And so
Yeah, that's what yes,
I
that's
think
a
you-
simpler way to put it, is like, if it were already done, then I would be like, oh, here it is. And
yeah, so I think it'll
I
just be for review purposes, I think it'll just be useful to say something like, yeah, there are reviews out there, but what hasn't been done is the following,
Mhm.
because then you get reviewers who are like, you missed this, right?
Right, right,
Adam's got his hand up.
yeah. Oh, Adam, yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, so is your review more, I guess, more focused on issues of measurement and, how we quantify, key concepts? I mean, sometimes they'll read a review that it's kind of just a summary of, well, this study found this and the effect was positive, and this study found this and the effect was negative, et cetera. But then they don't really delve into, these are the indicators that people chose to use, which sometimes that alone might be enough to explain why there could be variation across studies, is they're not really measuring the same exact thing.
Mhm.
So it sounded to me like that was a major focus of your efforts here, if I understand that.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. I think like this list of review papers that have emerged from Zara and my search of literature, this is mostly, these have been uncovered by her. A few of them I had found as well, but she's tabulated them really nicely in our database. Most of these reviews, if you even just read the titles, which is why I have them up here, are asking questions about impact and effect. Like, this is a review of pathways linking built environment to subjective well-being right here. Can homes affect well-being? How do housing conditions affect mental health outcomes? Relationship between buildings and health. That's a study of how building features from different studies, how do they affect health? This one, a systematic review of social consequences and mental health outcomes from, again, in this case, it's high-rise residential they presume that the measurement devices are fine. There's no questions about them. And I'm not necessarily saying they are wrong, but I think what you're getting at, most of these reviews find weak to, in a meta-analysis sort of framework, weak to no impact, because they're just all over, there's studies with positive linkages and negative linkages for the same thing or the same named thing. And so I think what's been motivating me and feels like still a space to contribute is, like what you were saying, if the measures we were using were more standardized, or if we restricted systematic reviews and meta-analyses like these to things with similar measurements, right? Like I don't want to necessarily dampen diversity of trying to understand a thing that's really complex in the measurement space, but in terms of how people are comparing them, they're comparing them as if they are the same thing, or as if they're similar enough to compare. But to me, a lot of these studies are trying to compare one study that looked at an objective measure of temperature and mental health, and another that asked people about it, and put those on the same playing field. It wouldn't be a problem if they treated them as different, but they treat them as the same, right? So if they said there's different bodies of evidence and different ways of measuring temperature or thermal comfort, that'd be one thing, but that's not generally what's being done in these reviews. They're just saying this study found a positive effect between increasing wintertime temperature and lowering the depression score, and this other study, didn't, but they're not comparing the same thing. So I guess that's my longer response to your question. I wanted to highlight these reviews because, and I've really appreciated Zara in introducing some that I wasn't aware of, in part to tell this story that there's not only been studies, quite a lot of studies on built environment factors and well-being outcomes described in different ways. There's been quite a lot of reviews, which for each review, there needs to be a body of evidence that's being reviewed. And I didn't get to the point where I could tabulate like the number of studies considered in each review, but they ranged from like if you like in a given review, they range from like 7,000 observations down to 58. And others were like 70 observations down to 29 or something like that. So there's quite a spread in terms of, for each of these reviews, what their flow diagram looks like, but most of them have a flow diagram that we could look at. And I've been thinking that maybe looking at their flow diagram to extract some information about how the literature's been distilled already might be valuable for this paper, but yeah, I think, is anybody unclear about the takeaway I was trying to get at here? I'm not sure. I feel like I tried to summarize it, but no, I don't see any hands. So
No, I think it's okay, Ellison. I think it's just, it's going to be a challenge when you write it, but I think it may be easier to write it when you get a long time to try to choose the words than to give it in a presentation.
yeah. I wanted to, I guess, yeah, to me, it felt valuable to include some of the types of like synthesis outputs that came from these reviews in the form of figures, to illustrate a couple of things. You can maybe see on the side that some people seem to, I would say they're more qualitative and embrace the diversity of things that show up in the literature. So this is one example of a review that was published in 2022. This is the top one here. Can homes affect well-being? A scoping review among housing conditions, indoor environmental quality, and mental health. And in this one, I think they ended up looking at maybe 58 papers or 29, I don't remember. But this was one of their resulting figures, which moves from the left, indoor environmental quality parameters, into housing conditions, into mental health outcomes, which are quite diverse, from overall mental health to sleep problems to cognitive fatigue, and then into social features and additional housing features, which are things like how precarious is your housing situation? Was the COVID-19 pandemic a part of the study? Spatial design, occupant control. And I'll be honest, I don't really know how they produced this figure. I tried to figure it out. And I think it's representing, like, for instance, if we followed a line on the left-hand side, there are, you know, the most, the largest number of studies consider acoustic comfort. A smaller number consider overcrowding, and even smaller number considered thermal comfort in this particular review. And then, you know, approximately equal to the acoustic comfort was the indoor air quality. And then if you followed a thread, it's like, well, the indoor air quality, this indoor air quality study didn't include any housing qualities, but it did ask about overall mental health and something about population. I don't know how they came up with that term. I am not trying to show this just to criticize it, but I think this is the kind of output that I saw some studies, review studies, wanting to come out with, which is a way to make sense of lots of different factors that seem to intersect on the home. And I think they succeeded in communicating complexity here, but I don't know that there's a lot more that I can take from a figure like this. They, in their results section, you know, more or less, outcome, I see your hand, Adam, just a second, made the statement that the review, like their result or the output of their review, is identifying 5 housing conditions, like age, floor level, housing qualities, household composition, etc., that had an impact on mental health outcomes. And by synthesizing this, their goal was a list of design recommendations, and they serve as a basis for future research. So that's an example of the kind of output of other reviews. Yeah, Adam, I'll let you ask your question.
Yeah, sorry, just real quick.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
We're this looks really nice, but I guess like you, I'm having trouble making sense of it. We're not supposed to read it left to right. That's what I originally started doing, but that's not correct. I don't think, right? That, like, it, I don't know. I guess I share your concern that I can't really parse out anything really useful from it, even though it looks, like you say, it's really good at demonstrating how complex the literature is, but it doesn't seem to flow one particular direction, I guess. Am I reading that right, or am I just totally missing that? I know it's a little bit unfair to ask you because you're not the author also, but
Yeah, my read of the figure and my read of the text that supported it is that I don't think they knew what they were trying to represent here beyond complexity. And producing Sankey diagrams like this is very easy now on the web and popular. So I think it was a way to structure these features in a more visually appealing way, but I don't think there's a logic or a grammar to the image that there's like meaning to be extracted from it. Stacy?
While you were answering Adam's question, I was looking at this more closely and I realized I answered my own question. I was really focused on the IEQ side of this, and I was like, but where's like quality in here and housing quality? I just hadn't read yet to the middle columns. Now I feel kind of silly for not that. But something that I think is kind of interesting is like, I'm sort of wondering why they put indoor air IEQ parameters
Mhm.
like feeding through housing conditions instead of
Mhm.
putting like housing conditions on some sort of like equal level with IEQ so that they were more stacked in this. I see Ryan shaking his head like maybe that's a
Yeah,
good
I think that's your
observation.
question in the chat,
But
Ryan.
that, oh, interesting. So anyway, I wasn't reading the chat either, but I just was like really missing the housing quality aspect and wondering also like if you've come across in the research, like when people are chasing more problems in the home, if that has an effect on their health and well-being in general. Like you fix one thing, but now you have to fix something else. And now something else breaks, and now you have to fix something else.
Mhm.
And how that contributes to stress.
Yeah, the compounding of like multiple things to handle in the home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
Anyway, those just comments and not like actual
Yeah.
questions on here, but
Yeah, and I hesitated. I mean, I think my self-doubt is that, well, there's a study out there that would have a good figure that I would have liked to find to share. Is like there's something out there that works well, but I don't want to pick on this figure too much, so I will probably move on shortly, but I do think it did a few things for me. One, it illustrates the complexity I experienced in this literature review process. And not just complexity, like there's lots of things, but the ways in which they connect in what comes first, what comes next, the sequencing is also complex. I think this figure is trying to illustrate that. I disagree a lot with some of the orders and like categorization. I find it in that sense it's sloppy, so I don't want to focus on that because that's just an issue of execution, not strategy.
I think this is, so let me just say generally, I think this is what a lot of us are dealing with. Like there's in whether it's qualitative or quantitative research, there's like a whole bunch of, oh, look, everything's connected. And here is a figure that shows how messy it is and how connected and et cetera, et cetera. And then the question is, what do we do with that? And importantly, what do we tell other people to do with that? Because what happens, I think, when somebody's trying to step outside of their comfort zone, is they're willing to be open to the problem being more complex, but you show them something like this and they just shut down. They're like, oh, forgive me, you know. and so I think that's part of the challenge we're grappling with. How do you make progress in a complex system?
Yep. And I think I can't show you what I wanted to yet, I guess. So I was wanting to show you in this, this text that I pulled out here in this white box comes from their abstract. And this would, to me, represent a failure of our review if I end up with saying like we identified well-being measures that fall into different domains in field-based studies, and we've provided a list of them for future researchers. So I think what I can show you right now, and I have a few more things I'd like to get to, but is I'm developing a clear idea of what I would like to move beyond or rise above. And this, I sympathize with what this research group was trying to do, but I don't want this to be the result of what we do, which is just a list of things that people have measured and a disorganized list at that. See, I'm gonna skip over this one. Just an example of another study. I did wanna, yeah, this is the one I wanted to highlight another recent review. This is, Yeah, this one, the relationship between buildings and health, a systematic review. This is 2019. I guess I wrote the wrong date here. This should be 2019. And the purpose of showing you this is was one of the larger reviews. The initial search result was over 7,000 unique articles. They removed duplicates, excluded things from review, nearly 6,800 were excluded. So the full text eligible was only 48. And their final tally was 39 studies. And I wanted to highlight this for all of us to know, like, the relationship between buildings and well-being or mental health is not a new one to be studied. There are a lot of people who have tried to understand it. So that there are other things to learn from this review, but that's the main takeaway. Yeah, and yet when they summarize, so this is the same people studying their 39 studies, and this is their best figure breakdown of studies identified by theme. They have in the light blue 21 studies that reference like housing quality was important, thermal and ventilation, housing quality, health and safety is in orange, access and relocation is in gray, neighborhood or community regeneration or renewal is in yellow, and then improved design, non-residential was in darker blue. And again, I think to me, this represents it's difficult to get new knowledge out of these kinds of reviews. And so that's, I think that's a new point that I'm making. I don't think I made the same point last time, which is that by looking at these in more detail, I'm seeing that even when pretty rigorous review processes are applied, it's been what people have extracted from it and presented has been nothing more than what I think we would have said to begin with. And that's, I don't think that's an illusion of knowing because we read it. I think these categories have already been identified for several decades in the literature as being important for the relationship between housing and health of any kind. And so I think it's motivating me to feel like the work is in figuring out how to provide a result that's more discriminating. Okay. So I don't have, what is this? So the last thing, and I guess I don't have enough to fill the whole time, but the last thing I wanted to sort of highlight in terms of what we are getting from the review process, which includes 129 observations right now that haven't been, we're not at this point. Like we haven't gone to the studies included in synthesis. We're not really even, I'd say, yet at the full text articles eligible. Although we might be, we might be at the point where we're assessing them for eligibility from the full text, not just abstracts. But I don't think we have our full text articles like identified as these are the ones we will go through, but we're getting there. Of the 129 studies, this isn't representing all of them, but we have 32 that involves what I'm calling like face-to-face data collection. So they're in study sizes less than a couple hundred and gathering data from people either through surveys or measurements of their home or both. And then there are 25 that I'm calling remote because they involve a survey like the American Community Survey. Or, well, that one's maybe too big, but that one's probably too big. There are like a couple thousand person, or couple thousand, person responses for a survey like deployed with a specific purpose, not an ACS is a bad analogy here. Surveys that were deployed, with a specific purpose, maybe repeatedly, maybe some longitudinal quality to it, but and that purpose often included or was expressly focused on housing and well-being. So those are the counts of studies that I think are looking like the database from which we would pull like what measures were being used. And that's actually falling in the realm of what I think is possible. It's like, 50 to 60 studies. We might get a few more, but I think that's as much as I have to say about that one. And then the other thing that I think has been an interesting finding for me, and Zara may want to comment on this as well. I hadn't taken a close look at where the studies were taking place, but this is a plot of where studies are taking place. There are, I think like maybe 30 to 35 that I'm going to call NA, that are not taking place in a specific location. And so they're not part of the face-to-face or the remote studies. They're like studies that are looking at how well-being gets measured or commenting on how it should be measured. They probably won't inform the data analysis of well-being measures in terms of like counts and specific well-being measures, but they are informing how well-being measures are conceived. And I think that's important for the review. But these are all studies that have been done in a physical place, either remote survey or a face-to-face thing. There's one, it's not represented. Oh, there are a few multi-country studies. Here is multi-country, it's just 3 of them. And they had 2 countries represented in one, 14 in another, and 35 in another. So they're quite different in terms of the number of countries. But the rest, I thought this was interesting, is covering a lot wider range of countries than I guess I initially expected. And there isn't too much over, like there's no one country that stands out as having like an inordinately larger number of studies than others, which I think is interesting. And there's not, there's only 5 from the US right now that we found. I think there's still some to add to this, but this is kind of where we're at.
Ellison,
Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
you had said that you were going to focus only on the United States. Did I misunderstand that, or is that?
I had posed that as a question the last time,
Okay.
and I had expressed that as a desire on my part. Yes, that's absolutely true. I think when Zara and I were doing the searching, we decided we would still leave it open. And in light of the number of studies that we've found from other places, I think I put this on here because I'm rethinking whether that's the right constraint. Like there's a lot more to be offered, I think, from these studies in other places. And I'm wondering if we should consider them. They aren't as different as I thought they would be. I think initially I was like, oh, well, I want to constrain it to the US because the US is a different context and how people think about well-being is different. But and it very well may be, but I don't yeah, I don't feel as strongly like the review needs to be restricted, though it could be. I don't know. Yeah, Narsimha, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, hi. I was thinking, so this group of studies tackle all different elements of well-being, not just comfort, right? This could be indoor air quality or something that's noise, whatever, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if you were to focus on thermal comfort, do you know how many would reduce to from this list?
No.
And what? Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, yeah, just to complete my thought along the lines of your earlier question that Tammy was asking, we had also discussed how it may be different for cold countries versus warm countries, right? Where it's focused on heating versus cooling. And that may be one reason to maybe split out a certain set of countries versus another, if that's what you want to do. But I don't know, maybe you've decided that it's better to look broadly at well-being because comfort narrows it too much. I don't know. I think with regards to thermal comfort, there can be a reason to focus on one set of countries, but I like indoor air quality. I can imagine there's a reason because the outdoor conditions also and the sources of pollution are so different. Standards may be very different. Yeah, so I think it partly your answer depends on what you want to focus on, right?
Right, I do agree that if the focus were to narrow into a set of indicators or a narrower subset of well-being indicators, that there then might also be a partner rationale for the type of setting. I think that brings up a couple points that I want to separate. And one is that I have gone back and forth and talked with you individually as well as in this larger group about focusing maybe just on one thing like thermal comfort. And I think I don't know the answer to how many studies are right now. I don't know the fraction. It feels like it's a common theme, but I couldn't say if it's a third or 2/3 or yet. But I'll also say I do feel like it was an influential conversation last week, Tammy, with you, that if there's a vacillation on my part, which I think there is, between narrower scope, broader scope, I think I toggled back to broader scope after our conversation to like embrace the complexity. I think that I was coming from a place of wanting to constrain the set of indicators because it feels like it'd be easier to do, easier to write.
Yeah, I don't recall exactly how that was framed, but I think. So something I was going to raise is that, so you had earlier had this diagram that said how studies were excluded. And I just always feel really suspicious when it was like, well, we had 6,800 studies and we excluded 6,700 of them and we're left with 100.
Yeah.
Now, I know you can't review the 6,800 studies, but it just makes me think like, look, you threw out 95% of everything. So can you really say this is a systematic review? And I realize that people do that, but I also feel like there's just some value in having a strong sense of what you've excluded and explaining why that's excludable. I think that was that's what I remember from our conversation last week, that rather than just saying, well, I can't do that many, so I'm not going to acknowledge that that certain types of studies are there, that somebody else needs to review them. And then identify what you are contributing to. I don't know, it's hard. I mean, I feel like this is just hard. Because everything is quite messy. There's like so much literature. It needs to be reviewed, and yet nobody can possibly do it. So but I do think that if people winnow it down to 20, it's or something, it just feels, it feels like something non-objective has taken place, but it's not admitted.
Yeah, and I do. I think I am of the same mind that the basis for exclusion is maybe the more critical thing to articulate, and so that could still involve excluding studies other than those that consider thermal comfort. Yeah, feeling unsure whether this would be right or not. I think
Ellison,
where I am right now is feeling like we could make more rapid progress without constraining the scope to thermal comfort, because one, we didn't start there. So the review has yielded papers that are is sort of agnostic to whether thermal comfort shows up. And the other is that I think wading into thermal comfort in some ways is easier because it's more, I think there's more things that are named, and the taxonomy of thinking is more clearly laid out. But there's also more people that have been active in using that metric, and so I feel like there'd be more hazards of not knowing about somebody's work somewhere. That's maybe not a great rationale, but
Ellison, I wanted
Yes.
to jump, just to help your thinking. I'm agnostic about whether you stick to thermal comfort or not, just to be clear. If you're finding this, the issue Tammy raised, that you exclude so much in the search, what are we leaving out? One potential criterion that you could use as an and to what you have is based on citations to indicate articles of influence.
yeah.
And you're restricting yourself to those that have had influence, because there may be a ton of studies out there. You can't review everything, but you're focusing on what seems to have had an impact on you.
Mhm. No, is that consistent? So I have been encountering this concept of a bibliometric review, which is newish to me. I've seen the term before. I've never really given it much thought, but that sounds similar to what you're suggesting, Narasimha, that we'd consider inclusion of papers or exclusion of papers on a basis related to like peer-reviewed literature metrics like citations, or maybe even journal types, or I don't know, there could be other factors too in that bibliometric space. And I think it kind of gets, Brian, at what you're, the related point I saw in the chat around like gray literature. But maybe before we come to that, Narasimha, is that like, is what I just said about bibliometric review consistent with what you were thinking, or at least?
Could be. I actually don't know to say for sure what is
Okay.
included in the bibliometric review and whether it's based on assessing quality, and influence or not.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, and that's a reason to exclude the gray literature. Not that it's always valid, but you want peer review for quality control, and you want citation for influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I might. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say, I think we assume that citation is quality all the time. And so to me, like, if you want to do that, like, that's something that like we do all the time. So it's a valid assumption to make.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's defensible in the realm of who we'd be writing this for. It does get a little bit at something that I guess I'm just raising so people are aware. I feel like I have a very strong bias of like judging certain journals is just terrible, but that's where a lot of this work goes. So it shows up in our review. So if I don't apply some sort of weight to like, if it would be through impact factor or publisher or something like that, there's a lot of really poorly vetted research. And these aren't directly in our review as much as they are in some of the reviews that have already been done of like effects. But there's, yeah, anyway. I don't know that I want to go down that route at this moment. I did want to come back, Ryan, to your point, because I wanted to, and we're kind of close to time. You put in the chat this comment about gray literature, long government project of redevelopment related to welfare, not just in the US, but also in the UK. And I agree with you. I think there's actually quite a lot of literature that like talks about how well-being is represented in spaces that don't end up getting published in peer review. And I'm not sure, we haven't opened up our review to that gray literature, but I maybe want to hear more from you, what you were thinking.
To me, it was interesting when you said like, we have this review, but it's everything we already knew, because like we knew that from somewhere. And so that's where I wonder if like some of that is like, we know this because government's been dealing with this stuff for forever. And if that's true, it might show up in your citations of the paper you have eventually, because like somewhere along the line, somebody should have cited government papers. So it's more just something I thought was worth keeping in mind if like
Yeah.
there's a hidden literature that's not showing up because it doesn't fit within these databases we have.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. I want to make sure I remember that.
And just to be clear, the 50 plus the studies, field studies, right? They cover different dimensions of well-being.
Wait, can you say that again? Sorry.
If I recall, you had some 50 plus studies that had field work, field
Uh-huh.
studies, right?
Oh, this.
Yeah, yeah. So this is for all types of different dimensions of well-being. We may be looking
Yes.
at in the
Yeah, they consider, we aren't screening things out based on what measures of well-being they said they use.
Okay.
Quite a few of them, for instance, use subjective well-being as their single measure. Others, yeah, go ahead.
This sounds like a good number in terms of the number of
Mhm.
studies you're analyzing. Just kind of it's not 10 and it's not 1,000. It's so
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like a good check for me. It makes sense it's broad enough that it is a synthesis, but it's not
Mhm.
so broad that you're going to have too many things to say.
Yeah, right. Which brings me to a wrap-up point. I didn't want to present your work, Tammy, but Tammy has been working alongside this effort on how to talk about indicators and measures of well-being and satisfiers. And I haven't fully digested what she shared with me, but it's an important component of this paper in my mind, and maybe Tammy's also. And I didn't intend to present it, Tammy, but I think it's going to be really important for interpreting the data we extract from these field studies, because they are talking about measures of well-being that are as disparate as we measured indoor CO2 to we asked a question about subjective well-being, but they're calling them measures of well-being. And indoor CO2 and overcrowding might be a different type of thing, like a determinant of well-being, versus subjective well-being, which might be the thing itself. And I'm not even using language yet that I've learned from you, Tammy, but I think that piece of the paper will be really important.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Ellison. I'm still trying to get my head around it. I would like to present that later. I have a figure in my head that I have to develop that may not go in your paper, but that I hope will help me think. And I think this whole process has been just kind of swimming in this sea of different possibilities and looking around and going, oh, everybody else is swimming in the sea too, but we need a way to have some guidance about what we're doing. So and I think we're all looking at that in different ways. I don't know. I find it all unsatisfying. Anyway, the thing that I'm trying to make into a small piece of Ellison's paper is probably worth discussing separately.
Yeah, I think so. That I had just wanted to reference it since I think it's pretty critical to extracting something more than a list out of all the things that people have listed that they measured in those field-based studies. So I think that's all I have. I really appreciate the questions as well as the feedback and suggestions. I don't know when I'm on the schedule yet again, but maybe I'll put myself there for March.
Yeah, and I guess I'm wondering, Ellison, as you go through, I think you raise questions with me because I think you come up against different questions as you're working through the process. So how is there a way without being on the schedule that you could pose them to the group? You could probably just send out an email to the group.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like, and even if nobody answers, it's fine, right? They can know what you're thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I'm happy to go that route too.
And I also think it's fine for other people to communicate that kind of question or even a result before they have a meeting scheduled for them.
Yeah. I think that's it for me. Zara, is there anything that you wanted to add? Since you've been really instrumental in assembling the literature.
Oh, there is one thing in that we consider when we consider different countries, there is a different perspective for measuring well-being. For instance, Asian countries more focused on crowd and neighborhood and housing quality and cost rather than housing features or architectural design. Most European countries are focused on architectural design, like lighting and other acoustic design and other things. This is something that I encountered when I searching for the papers. It's something interesting.
Yeah, that's a great observation.
So if we focus only on United States, in fact, we limit our perspective to a limited measures for well-being.
Yep, I think we do, and I guess the question has been like, is that a limit we want? I think right now I don't see a strong rationale for it. I think we have a nice database of studies that we can start drawing out extracting the features of the study, for lack of a better way of thinking about it.
Well, and I think if you had only 5, which is about what it looked like,
Yeah.
then it'd be a really small review.
Right.
But somehow I thought you were going to have more from the United States.
Yeah, I did too, and I have been meaning to look into why that we're not getting them, because I think there are more, and that's where like the downside, I guess, of this is a work in progress. I think we have enough articles to start looking at them, and I think last time Tammy and Zara and I talked, I wanted to get going on that to see what's there, and now that we see what's there, maybe I want to go figure out what studies I had in mind that maybe aren't showing up and why they're not showing up. See if there are others that are missing for similar reasons. Well, thank you. I think that's it.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See everyone next week. Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you.
Bye. See everybody.